best of luck in future endeavors. Thank you, and I yield back.
Speaker, it's now my pleasure to yield to, and you'll notice a theme here that, there's nothing greater than the honor of being asked by the Speaker, either Mr. Boehner, Mrs. Pelosi, or Mr. Hastert, to be the Speaker pro tem and preside over the House. And you'll see a theme of members from both sides who have had the privilege of doing that and have had the benefit of the counsel of Mr. Sullivan. And one of our best presiding officers, the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Biggert, I'm pleased to yield to her.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and Mr. Speaker, it's not every day we get to speak on the House floor about friends and colleagues that are not constituents or other members of Congress. And tonight we have the distinct privilege to recognize a friend and fixture of Congress and a behind-the-scenes Mr. John Sullivan. Most of you will probably remember that John was appointed parliamentarian by our former colleague, Speaker Dennis Hastert, in 2004, and did serve for 25 years. And those that have worked with him will tell you he is an excellent parliamentarian and an institutionalist and man of integrity that truly cares about the House of Representatives. And he would never bend the rules to pursue a certain outcome. And how you play the game is more important to him than whether you win or lose. I just wanted to tell a couple things. When I first came to Congress, and it was at that time, freshmen always had a week to chair the floor at night. And so I guess because I had a B for a last name, Biggert, that I got to do it first. Now, the only problem with that was that the training was the next week. So I went to the floor, and I stood up there, and I had this microphone sitting there, and I looked out and I said, "What am I doing here?" And I think I was kind of frozen, and John said, "This is what you do," and so I proceeded on. Another time I was in the chair, and suddenly there was a lapse of decorum by two of our members, one on each side of the aisle. I won't name the names, but suddenly they started moving towards each other. And I said, "What do I do?" And he said, "Bang the gavel hard," and multiple times. So suddenly they stopped in their tracks, and they did retreat back to the desk to continue after we got things under control. So I really appreciate, that we have had this opportunity. It is really an honor to stand and chair this floor, and I think that the parliamentarian John Sullivan made it easy. But I have a few other things that you may not know about John, that he went to the Air Force Academy, and as a graduate of Indiana University's law school, he is a huge Hoosier fan, and I can only imagine how proud he was of the Indiana Elite Eight basketball performance against Kentucky last Friday. The only thing that happened wrong was that Kentucky beat Indiana by a vote of by 1 point, 73 to 72. So that kind of ended Indiana in the March Madness. Another part of the behind-the-scenes function of the House that John's strategic wisdom and advice was critical to the continuity of the House function was in the days and weeks following the tragic events of September 11th, 2001. And he performed there admirably. So John has led the our parliamentarian's office in a collegial and a very professional manner to the benefit of the office, the members, and the House, and we are fortunate for his service and wish him well in retirement, and we will miss him. I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I yield 2 minutes to my distinguished friend from Virginia, through my good friend in Ohio, to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Millwatt.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman for yielding time. Of course, I'm not from Virginia. I'm from North Carolina. So, but that happens to me and Bobby Scott all the time. We get confused with each other, states and personalities, because we sit beside each other in judiciary, and we're good friends. So I'm never insulted when anybody does that to me. I dare say that if folks are watching this proceeding on C-SPAN or at home, they're wondering, who in the world is John Sullivan? I think that's probably the highest commendation that we can give to John Sullivan as a parliamentarian, because if he had been involved in any kind of controversy or one side or the other in this institution had accused him of misinterpreting rules, then people would know that there's a parliamentarian that's basically the referee in this institution that both sides have to respect in order for the institution to work effectively. There's been no controversy, that the people outside know about. We know inside our institution that the parliamentarians are dealing with controversial rulings, close rulings, trying to figure out what the precedents are for what we can do and cannot do, what has been done this way in the past, and therefore represents a precedent for us to be able to do it in the future. But outside, nobody has ever heard of John Sullivan because there's been no controversy, and that's a great thing to have said about him. He's been absolutely even-handed. You've heard the words nonpartisan, because this is a position that you cannot be or take the Republican side or the Democratic side. You've got to call the rules as you see them. There's nothing worse than at the end of March Madness, at the end of the game, one team saying that the referees influenced the outcome of the game. And so that's a high mark for John Sullivan. When he replaced the prior parliamentarian, Mr. Johnson, I thought surely we would go into some level of chaos, but the only difference I've ever been able to distinguish between him and Mr. Johnson is that he can't throw a baseball like our prior parliamentarian did. If he can, he hadn't told me about it. I just wanted to take this moment to express our gratitude. He's been a tremendous mentor and, well, you can't call him a mentor, teacher of those of us who have been in this institution, who have tried to abide by the rules and go to the edge and not violate the rule, but knowing full well that we'll get absolutely nonpartisan advice and counsel from the parliamentarian about how to do things when we don't know how to bring them to the floor, and about how to maintain the decorum and respect of every single member in this House. I thank him for his friendship and the role that he has played in making our institution a much, much better place to live and work. Thank you. I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman from North Carolina for those remarks, and I'm glad that Mrs. Biggert talked about her experiences in the chair, because I think all of us have memories of that going back a number of years or a few years. And just before I yield to my next colleague, I just the very first speech I gave on the floor, I had brought in the American humorist Dave Barry to be my guest press secretary, and some folks in my party said I should have my head examined, and I'm sorry to report that isn't the first or the last time that that's happened to me over the last 18 years. But he wrote my speech, and it was all about the warning labels that need to be on stepladders. And Mr. Johnson was the parliamentarian, but John was his deputy at the time. And Dave Barry wrote in my speech that said, "Now, I'm not saying that all lawyers are scum-sucking toads." And we had to go to the parliamentarian's office to get it checked out to see if I could call lawyers scum-sucking toads. And I'm pleased to report to the House 18 years later that that's not a violation of the rules. So I intend to use it in future speeches. It's now my pleasure to yield to someone who, during his championing of eliminating pork and earmarks, wore a path out between where he was seated and the parliamentarian's desk, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Flake.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. And, Mr. Speaker, it's a bittersweet honor to take the podium during this altogether appropriate recognition of House parliamentarian John Sullivan upon his retirement. I recognize it as bittersweet because it's truly sad for me and all of us to see him go, but I'm sure he'll enjoy the break from all of us. I'm certain that tonight we'll hear, and we've already heard, his praises sung, particularly for his esteemed career that spanned some 2.5 decades and saw him rise from counsel to assistant to deputy, finally to full-fledged parliamentarian of this special institution. I would venture to say that few members or officers outside of the Rules Committee are able to sing his praises, having had quite as much experience as my office has had with him. According to a cursory review, it would appear that during Mr. Sullivan's tenure heading up the left side of the Speaker's dais, I've brought to the floor somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple hundred amendments and privilege resolutions, and have filed countless more with the Rules Committee. So it's with some experience that I say that both I and my staff have found the office of the parliamentarian under Mr. Sullivan's leadership to be fair and open, responsive, deliberative, and consistent. In fact, we've come to rely on it. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that what I most admire about John is his irrepressible respect for the House of Representatives as an institution. Partisan politics, heated rhetoric, games of gotcha, finger pointing and wagging are as common around here as, well, as common as FLAKE amendments. That's whether vetting germaneness issues with a provision or two or being given a few pointers about surviving on a desert island somewhere. I've darkened the door of John's office more than a few times. I can tell you this, when you spend time with John Sullivan, it's easy for your thoughts to turn to the genius of the Founding Fathers, the intention of the framers of the Constitution, and the beacon of freedom and democracy that the Congress represents. The veneration of this institution just rubs off when you spend any time with John Sullivan. As James Madison noted in the Federalist Papers, stability in government is essential to national character. I can think of no higher compliment to pay John than to say his stable influence in this chamber has been a credit to our national character. As a member of Congress, I thank him both for his service and for ensuring that the House will be more than ably served by those who assume the same responsibility. As a friend, I wish him the best in his next adventure. May it involve a deserted island somewhere in the South Pacific. I yield back.
Speaker, I yield through my good friend from Ohio to the distinguished gentleman from Arizona. 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Michigan and the gentleman from Ohio. In the 110th Congress as well as the 111th Congress, I had the opportunity to preside frequently. I was given that honor by Speaker Pelosi, and several of those years I clocked over 100 hours on the chair. And so I had an opportunity to be with John and see John's work as the parliamentarian. And I associate myself with all the remarks given by the previous speakers. John is very knowledgeable, well-read,
about the rules of the House. As my colleague Jeff Flake said, John was fair, and John was respected and is respected by the leadership of the House on both sides, as well as his staff. I have to tell you that his staff was always well prepared. They anticipated, especially in the debates, that we had controversial bills. They anticipated probably some of the areas that would hit some rocky roads, and they were always prepared. And so his staff was prepared, and they were always kind and caring to the person who was up on the chair, and many times assisted me to make sure that I read the paper right or gave the right response. And so I have to tell you that John, as the parliamentarian, did bring stability and respect, and I thank him for that. But during some of the debate that was pretty boring, or during votes, we had a chance to talk to each other about more social things. We talked about vacations he took, when his daughter Margaret was in town, restaurants, movies that we had seen. And so during those times I had the opportunity to know John as a person, and I found him in those conversations to know him as a caring husband to his wife Nancy, because he talked about some of the trips they went and some of the things that they did over the weekend, and obviously he was a caring father to his 3 children. And so for me it was a great joy to be presiding over the debate here at the House, knowing that the people that were going to be assisting me as parliamentarians were well prepared and were fair and respected the House. But more than that, I knew that I was dealing with a person, John A. Sullivan, who truly loves this House and wanted to make sure that this House was able to function well and there would be order. And so Jeff Flake is correct. When Jeff sometimes would get up, John would say, "Oh no, here comes another Flake Amendment." But we got through them, and in each case we did the best we could, and I know that his professionalism will always stand out. I congratulate Tom for succeeding him, but to my friend John Sullivan, I wish you the best. May you have a great retirement and continue to care for this House as you care for your family. Best wishes. I'll yield back my time.
Mr. Speaker, I am a little bit surprised that the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Pastor, who was a great presiding officer during what we call the troubled years, the Pelosi speakership, on our side of the aisle, thinks that our debates are boring and they're not riveting, seat of the pants, seat of the edge of the seat types things. Another wonderful presiding officer on our side whose stern countenance keeps the House in order is the distinguished gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Bonner, and I would yield to him.
I thank the gentleman, and I join the comments that have already been made in expressing our deep gratitude to a young man who, by many standards, is still a young man and who obviously has a very bright future in front of him, but has decided to embark on a new chapter in his already storied career. And so tonight, Democrat and Republican, North and South, the Dean of Congress, someone who's been here longer than many of us have been alive, and others who are coming tonight who are expressing our gratitude to a man named John Sullivan, we are all here tonight to really offer a heartfelt thanks for the example you have set, for the inspiration you have provided, and for the legacy that you are leaving behind. Many a young lawyer in this country, and John is an attorney, as has already been noted, when asked who inspired them to go into law, into that profession, cite a fictional character, someone who I'm proud, the author of To Kill a Mockingbird is from my home in Monroeville, Alabama, and the story is of Atticus Finch and the example that he set at a very difficult time in our nation's history. One of my favorite lines out of To Kill a Mockingbird that Atticus said is, "The one thing that doesn't abide by majority rule is a person's conscience." I believe that we can all agree that while we have rules in this House and no one more than the parliamentarian helps us abide by those rules and to follow the spirit of them, that John Sullivan has set the example of being an outstanding parliamentarian by using the rule but also by using his heart and his conscience. His rulings have sometimes been questioned but never disputed in a real sense, because his rulings and the rulings of the men and women who work with him have been seen by those of us who've been given the privilege of serving as members of Congress as the gold standard, truly as the good housekeeping seal of approval. If a ruling were appealed to the chair and the chair turned to the parliamentarian, as is often the case, we knew that the answer was as good as gold. He is truly the unbiased umpire who calls the balls balls, strikes strikes, and oftentimes has to tell us sometimes what we don't want to hear but what we need to know. And so I am so honored to stand here tonight along with my colleagues and to say thank you to someone who represents an army of professionals who, over the years and throughout the decades, men and women whose names have never been on the ballot, but who have made a lasting mark of love and support for this institution. Some, like myself, served on a personal staff. Others have served in committee, on committee staffs. And still a few others have had the privilege of wearing the title of Sergeant at Arms or Chaplain, or in this case, parliamentarian. A man that we truly respect, someone who has truly made this place a better place. And as Mr. Watts said earlier tonight, if the people back home who are watching this discussion tonight are hearing this debate, there is no debate. And John Sullivan may not be a household name in some parts of America, but John Sullivan has made the House of Representatives a better place by his service and by his example. And Mr. LaTourette, I appreciate you and Mr. Dingell hosting this special order for 1 hour for all of us to have a chance to say thank you for a job well done. May God continue to bless you, your wife, and your family. I yield back.
With thanks to my good friend for his kind comments, I yield to the distinguished gentlewoman from Maryland. 2 minutes through the distinguished gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise to pay tribute to our parliamentarian, our friend John Sullivan, for his service to this nation and to the United States House of Representatives. His departure as parliamentarian of the House comes as a sad note to many of us who've come to know John and depended on his wise counsel and expertise, as I have since I first entered this chamber in 2008, and many others have through the years. I'm happy that John is leaving on his own terms, and I wish him every happiness as he moves to the next phase of his life. As has been said, John was born in Chicago, Illinois. He graduated from the Air Force Academy, received a law degree from Indiana School of Law, and served honorably in the United States Air Force. John has dedicated his life to the noble calling of public service. Whether as an officer in the Air Force, as counsel of the House Armed Services Committee, or as member of the Parliamentarian's Office, for the past quarter century, he's ably served this House for 27 years. Some of my colleagues say 28 years, others say 25 years. It's been a long time. And he served the people of this country, this nation, for nearly 40 years. The job of the House parliamentarian is an exceedingly difficult one. We members would no doubt be a rather unruly lot without our parle. One must have a scholarly grasp of our Constitution, the rules and legislative procedures governing this institution, the integrity to be an honest and fair arbiter at all times, and possess the ability to work with both sides of the aisle at sometimes contentious moments. Throughout my time in the House, I've seen John Sullivan exhibit these qualities time and time again. It's a testament as to why he's so well respected by both Republicans and Democrats, which speaks volumes as to how successfully he's handled his job. I thoroughly enjoyed getting to know John and to learn from him the importance of rules and precedent in this institution that he so clearly loves and respects, and how to serve fairly and effectively as Speaker pro tem. Indeed, I tried mightily to imitate his calm and tempered demeanor. I spent quite a bit of time in the 111th Congress doing just that, and it helped me during one of my most proud moments as I presided over under John's wisdom and guidance during the passage of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. I remember well John's skilled mastery of our House rules when I presided during a blizzard, and our parliamentarian called to our attention a never-before-used rule to enable us to remain in session without disrupting a lot of winter holiday plans. I also learned that John likes to use sports analogies to describe his work almost as much as I do. He stressed to me and to other members the importance that when serving as Speaker pro tem, we become umpires and have to make rulings irrespective of partisan considerations. As important as it is to celebrate and honor John's professionalism, we honor him also as a person. Since John's an avid basketball fan, I wonder if it's a mere coincidence or if there's some deeper meaning in his resignation taking effect this Saturday, March 31st, the date of the Final Four of the 2012 NCAA Men's College Basketball Tournament. Though I'm not certain for whom John is cheering in this year's tournament, I do know that he's closely followed former Indiana and Texas Tech coach Bobby Knight's career since Coach Knight was at West Point decades ago. They met on numerous occasions, and John has a couple basketballs signed by Coach Knight. So I wish him an uninterrupted time through the finals. And here, John, I would just say through the Speaker that it's okay to choose sides. As we say goodbye to John, I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome his respected successor, Tom Wickham, the deputy parliamentarian, whom John has mentored. And I know Tom and the rest of the team will continue to guard the principles and rules that keep our democracy, our republic, and this chamber functioning with the level of dedication and integrity we witnessed from his predecessor. My first 4 years in the House of Representatives in our country are better off thanks to John Sullivan's public service. I wish you, John, your wife, Nancy Sands Sullivan, and your children, Michael, Margaret, and Matthew, continued success. John Sullivan has made me a better member, more willing to heed the gavel, more respectful of the chair, and more able to value this institution as he does, more confident as a member of Congress. I wish you every happiness. I know that your family's been a tremendous support to you in your service in this House and our nation. And to John Sullivan, you leave behind a legacy of service that others can and should aspire to, and we thank you. And with that, I yield.
I want to thank the gentlelady from Maryland for her remarks. It's now my pleasure to yield to another frequent presiding officer, an accountant by training and trade prior to his service in the House of Representatives, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway.
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I'll certainly not attempt the eloquence of all the previous speakers. I just simply want to say thanks to John Sullivan. He's the only parliamentarian that I know that I've served under. I hate to call it the reign, but his service as parliamentarian began just before I got here in January of '05, and so it's been my privilege to serve with John. He's been even-handed throughout, from my perspective, both 4 years in the minority and now in our 4th year back in the majority, and you can't tell with John's conduct which side you belong to, because he really does call them even-handedly. When you love the institution the way I do and other members to do, it's easy to recognize that love of institution in others. And there is no one that I know of that evidence of love of this institution is greater than what's demonstrated by John Sullivan. The long-term, the precedents of the House, all of the things that go apart, or that are part of this institution that make it one of the most valuable legacies of our founding fathers. John has upheld those traditions and those long precedents in a very admirable way. So, John, thank you for the many chapters of your life that you have spent spent in service to this House of Representatives. Thank you for that, and Godspeed in the many chapters of your life to follow this one. This institution is better for your long service. I'm a better member of Congress for your service. Thank you, John.
Well, I have no choice. Mr. Speaker, again, through the kindness of my good friend from Ohio, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts.
I thank the gentleman. I thank the gentleman from Ohio. Mr. Speaker, I thank both of the chairs here today for the opportunity to praise our departing House parliamentarian John Sullivan as he prepares to leave the House of Representatives after 27 years of distinguished service. I represent the 9th District of Massachusetts, where in my new district I have 727,514 people, most of them named Sullivan. So this seems like an Irish wake here, but it is certainly not. As we all know, John has served in the office of the House parliamentarian for most of his distinguished career, certainly the last 8 as the House parliamentarian. And serving as parliamentarian in this body takes a fair amount of skill and an enormous amount of patience. It is at times challenging, and it is that skill and ability and patience that John provides us as members and that we rely on to also allow the House to function in an orderly manner. And I think all the members here today know that the advice we receive and the guidance we receive from John Sullivan as our parliamentarian is given in an analytical, unbiased, and nonpartisan manner. Following in the footsteps of his mentor, former House parliamentarian Charlie Johnson, John has served as the parliamentarian to both Democratic and Republican houses. And I think it's a tribute to John's integrity and trustworthiness that he was appointed by 3 speakers of the House, Speaker Dennis Hastert, a Republican, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat, and now Speaker John Boehner, again a Republican, in a time period when we can just about agree on nothing between us. We agree on the great service of John Sullivan, and he has received the support and admiration from both sides of the aisle, and that is on display in the House tonight as both Republican and Democratic members pay tribute to a true man of the House. And while as members we are allowed to publicly pay tribute to John, I know that John's fellow workers and co-workers, former co-workers, also wish him the best as he prepares for his next challenge. And John has not let us know what his future professional plans will be, but we as a body know it will not be golf. We have seen John golf, and John Sullivan and the sport of golf are non-germane. So, but we all do know that he is enormously dedicated and devoted to his wife Nancy and their 3 kids, Michael, Margaret, and Matthew. And we wish him the best as he leaves his professional family and begins to enjoy his true family. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I want to personally thank John for his friendship and guidance to me during my time in Congress. John, you know that on many occasions the passions of this House have threatened to overtake proper decorum. And I think it's been your integrity and your ability to reason and your reputation for nonpartisanship that has pulled us back from the brink on many occasions. You have certainly raised the bar in terms of dedicated service to this institution. I thank you, and I wish you and your family Godspeed and good luck. God bless you, and thank you for your service to this House of Representatives, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman from Massachusetts for his observations, and I would simply say that if you and Mr. Dingell and Mr. VISCLOSKY who were in charge, we'd get a lot more done around here. With that, you know, every sport needs to have an anchor man, needs to have, if you want tug of war, you got to have an anchor man. If you're in baseball, you need to have a closer. And when trouble is a-brewing on the House floor, our side turns to our next speaker, the distinguished gentleman from Utah, Mr. Bishop, and I would like to yield to him.
I thank the gentleman from Ohio for that introduction. Since 1857, if I count correctly, John Sullivan is the 19th parliamentarian we have had in the House of Representatives, even though the term actually wasn't used officially until 1927. But of those parliamentarians in the 20th century, Louis Zeschler served for 46 years as parliamentarian, and I believe his replacement, Williams Brown, served for 20 years. So, John, in all sincerity, serving only 8 years as the parliamentarian here makes you a parliamentarian slacker. And I think a couple more years would be appropriate if you'd like to reconsider and stay with us. But through those years, those almost 8 years as the parliamentarian, 20-plus years working in that office, your ability to help the majority meet its goals while at the same time respecting the minority is not an easy task. But John Sullivan did do it with aplomb. Former Senator Eugene McCarthy once said, "The Senate has rules, but none of them over there care about it." In the House rules are too complex. Don't learn them, just ask the parliamentarian. And I think for all of us, we do that. I do know from my time in the chair, parliamentarians do not like ad-libbing. There is one time I simply turned to John and said, "Why don't we just mic you and I will move my lips?" I still think that would be far more appropriate, but I don't think anyone in his office found that funny. George Will once wrote that the only thing he remembers about his wedding day was the Cubs lost a doubleheader. I say that because John's grandfather pitched for the 1919 Chicago Black Sox, and John is still a fan of the White Sox and closely associated with that franchise. His replacement, Tom Wickham, who will come in, is a fan of the Cardinals. For a Cubs devotee like myself, there is just no hope in this world. But I do want to know, even though both of you are on the wrong side of the baseball sphere, that I want you to know that I thank you so very much, Mr. Sullivan, for your personal friendship. I also thank you for your two-plus decades of loyal service to this House. And I also thank you for your lifetime of service and dedication to this country. We wish you well. We are a better place for having worked with you here. I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I yield through my good friend from Ohio to my friend from Indiana, Mr. McCloskey, 5 minutes.
Mr. Dingell, I appreciate the time, and I want to thank both you and my good friend from Ohio for reserving this time and the chair's indulgence. Mr. Speaker, it is with fond admiration and profound respect that I take this time to recognize a very dear friend and one of Indiana's most distinguished citizens, the Honorable John Vincent Sullivan, who I will always claim as a resident of the 1st Congressional District, having graduated from Munster High School in Munster, Indiana. It has been mentioned that he has served this country in the United States Air Force, in fact, for 20 years, 9 years active service, 11 years in the Reserve, retiring with a designation of Lieutenant Colonel. What has not been mentioned, I don't think, this evening is that for some inexplicable reason, John also wanted to jump out of airplanes and became a qualified paratrooper, but ultimately found himself at Indiana University Law School. That has been mentioned by Ms. Biggert, but which was qualified by the gentlewoman from Maryland who indicated that, in fact, I don't think that John is so much an IU fan as he is a rabid Bobby Knight fan. But I do think that the mark of the man is the recognition of his legal acumen, his grace under pressure, and his scrupulous fairness, when a Democratic Speaker, Tip O'Neill, requested that he join the parliamentarian's office in 1987. And that 7 years later, his leadership skills and his ability to make nimble and wise decisions in very stressful and momentous situations was recognized by Republican Speaker Dennis Hastert, who asked that he become parliamentarian of the House. But, Mr. Speaker, John comes from a strong family of 9 children, and his siblings love him deeply and know him better than any of us. And I am happy to share some of their thoughts with my colleagues. Margaret mentions that as a teacher, I know about the incredible power of a good model. John has provided the best model of a good brother, husband, public servant, son, and man throughout my life, and I adore him. Sister Ann said, as a little sister, I chose John as my role model for integrity. Later, I chose him as my role model for word choice, too. Patty remarks that my heart is so full I do not know where to start. You know how I feel about my magnificent big brother. Gary for himself and for Mary Fran, John's sister, who he has lost, so that I speak for Mary Fran and myself in sending love and thanks to John for his service to our country. His brother Matt said, I would like to add my voice to my siblings in expressing my love and appreciation of our brother, John. Michael noted that John and I played together, ate together, fought together, got in trouble together, slept together, walked to school together, and talked to each other about everything. That is really where I learned all the important things about life. That is where I learned what it took to be a good man. John was my big brother, but he has always been my confidant and mentor. He is my #1 phone call when I need advice. He has the discipline and fairness that I lack, so it is good to have him to lean on. I love you, John, and I look forward to enjoying a piece of your retirement with you. Jerry observed that John went to take his physical qualification test for the Air Force Academy and came back and told Dad he didn't seem to do as well as he had expected. He did plenty well enough, passed, and graduated from the Academy. But it turned out that there was a reason for his feeling a bit less than full strength during the test. He had a case of mononucleosis that had not yet been diagnosed. He plowed through the tough test in typical fashion for John. Only he, as his own toughest critic, got any sense that something was not quite right. The rest of the world did nothing but approve of his skill, dedication, and durability, which have always added up to make him the best sort of guy. And as Brother Jim noted, I am 4 years older than John, and I would like to state for the record, John looks a lot older than Jim, but have looked up to him since I can remember. He is simply the finest man I know. He is as tough as they come, and he is as gentle as a lamb with the innocent and those less strong than he. He is fearless, and I have seen him risk much to speak for the right, regardless of the risk to himself. I have seen him operate in the right with all the advantages, yet let the vanquished foe up and off the hook time and again. He embodies the idea of following the harder right rather than the easier wrong, and of being humble and gentle in victory, stern and unyielding in defeat. His goodness and strength are clear from the moment you meet him. And, Mr. Speaker, I would add that I will miss the opportunity that John provided every time I had young people in the gallery since 1987. For the opportunity to point him out with pride as being from back home and emphasizing that he was someone they could emulate, that by studying hard, by using the talents God had given them, they too could achieve a position of great responsibility and great opportunity to be of service to others and to their country. We will all miss you, John, a man who has dedicated and devoted his life to serving his country. This institution and each of us have become more effective and judicious stewards of the public trust because of John Sullivan's example, his wisdom, and yes, his good humor. So I would conclude by saying, Mr. Speaker, that despite all of the disparaging remarks John has made over these many years about the quality of the football team in South Bend, Indiana, called Notre Dame, I do sincerely wish him, his wife Nancy, and their family every blessing and happiness that life has to offer. And I would yield back my time, and I thank the gentleman for the time.
I thank the gentleman from Indiana, and Mr. Speaker, it's my understanding Mr. Dingell has the
Yes, the gentleman, Jill, we have no further demands for time, but I would like to say a couple words.
So, as do I. So do you want to go first? You're the Dean of the House. You go first if you want to go first.
This, I would tell the gentleman, is his time, and he has led in the matter. I'm prepared to accede to his leadership.
You know what? I think we need to hear from you, Mr. Dingell.
Well, I begin then by thanking my good friend from Ohio for his leadership in this matter and express to him my great personal respect and high esteem. I am particularly pleased that we have been able to have these few brief remarks from his friends, colleagues, and co-workers about our good friend Mr. Sullivan, our co-worker, and the parliamentarian of the House. I've known all the parliamentarians during their sitting back to Mr. Deschler, Mr. Brown, Mr. Charlie Johnson, and now, of course, our good friend Mr. Sullivan. And before them, I had the privilege of knowing the distinguished gentleman from Missouri, a member of this body and also a prior parliamentarian of this body. I'm sure that this has been an evening that has been somewhat painful to our friend, the parliamentarian, because he has heard all kinds of nice things about him at a time when that is rather an unaccustomed practice. But I would like to tell him how proud we are that we've had such a dedicated public servant to work for and on behalf of the House of Representatives and on behalf of all of us. As he retires at the end of this week as the parliamentarian of the House, I hope he knows that his work would be approved, and enthusiastically so, by all the gentlemen that I have mentioned earlier. I would also hope that he understands that he has seen the greatest respect and affection from his colleagues here in the House for his fairness, impartiality, for his decency, for his integrity, and for the fair and nonpartisan, and he will note I did not say bipartisan, I said nonpartisan way he has conducted his responsibilities as the parliamentarian of the House. Each and every one of us could count on Mr. Sullivan to take our calls on even the smallest question about motions and procedures. And all of us, without any question or any doubt, knew that the advice we were getting was completely honest. We also knew that he would help us work out our problems so that we could be functioning and effective members of this body. And we also knew that he would take a firm stand for the protection of the traditions and the institutional values of this body, and would ensure that the rules were always interpreted properly. He was a true institutionalist. He loved and revered the House of Representatives. And he knew something that was very important that many of us have not yet learned, and that is that this body, as an institution, is more important to all of us and to this nation than is any single issue or aggregation or congregation of issues or any individual or any group of individuals. Because without the trust and the affection and the respect of the American people, this institution cannot function, cannot lead, cannot govern, and cannot carry out the trust that we have been given back to the days of the founders of the country. I want Mr. Sullivan to know that he will always be missed. But we know that he has left us in capable hands because he's built a fine office, and Tom Wickham, like Mr. Sullivan, has already proven to be dependable, discreet, and well-versed in the rules and procedures of the House. And we know that he will serve the House with the same dedication, decency, integrity, and honesty that his predecessor, Mr. Sullivan, has characterized his work with. All of us are going to miss him. He has been a distinguished public servant in the highest sense of the term. And all of us will wish him well as he goes off to do his business, whatever it may be, and we will hope that he has tremendous success, long life, great happiness, and a chance to come back here from time to time to see his old friends and to join in talking about the memories that we share together, the great things that we've done, the small things that we've done, and all the wonderful stories that we have to tell and share about the privilege of serving in this, the greatest legislative body in the world. And I am going to express to him the wish that he will have happiness in his retirement. I know that that wish is shared and honored by all of his colleagues and all of our colleagues, and I know that the very fine group of parliamentarians who are here to show their appreciation to him and for his wonderful leadership share in the thoughts that you have heard. This has been an extraordinary bipartisan expression of the affection and respect that we have for our parliamentarian, which he has earned. We've not praised him, we've simply told the truth about him. And that's something that he can be proud that we're able to do and willing to do. I would note that there are some who might live in mortal and desperate fear of having others telling the truth about him. So in any event, we express to him our thanks and our admiration, and also that of the entire membership of the House of Representatives, who've been honored by your service, your guidance, your friendship, your dignity, and your great appreciation of this body and the responsibilities we have. And now I thank my good friend from Ohio for being so generous and for his leadership in this matter.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for your indulgence, and I also want to thank the Dean of the House for organizing this special order. You know, the House of Representatives is building. It's a nice place, but it's really the people. And John Dingell is the House of Representatives, as his father was before him. Pete VISCLOSKY is the House of Representatives. When I got here, Charlie Johnson was the parliamentarian. He was the House of Representatives, and John Sullivan has replaced him, and he is, in fact, an institution with the House. I don't want to break the mood here, but in my opinion, the jury's still out on Wickham. We'll see how he does. But I think things have the opportunity to be okay. I just want to tell two quick stories that, for me, told the measure of the man. The first was a number of years ago when we had a member who was going to be expelled from the House of Representatives. It was only the third time in modern history that that occurred. The last one was in the 1970s. Nobody had really had a chance to study the precedents and things of that nature. And I was kind of surprised that that process only took an hour of floor time. I mean, an hour to basically end somebody's political life. And so I went to John, and he gave me advice and told me to file something to postpone it to a date certain, which I'd never heard of, and I bet most members never heard of. But that gave members of the House an additional hour to discuss the case. And I think at the end of that, because of John's stewardship and knowledge of the rules, the House as a body felt better at the conclusion of that 2-hour debate. You know, and in Ohio, it happened to be a member from Ohio. We're celebrating in Ohio that Ohio State's in the Final Four. Our guy, John Boehner, is the Speaker of the House. And it also marks the first time in 8 years we haven't had a member of our delegation in prison. So we're pretty pleased about that as well. But I will tell you that it was John's counsel that got us through that. And the second one was more recently, a couple of years ago, August. On our side, we call it the Day of the Stolen Vote. I think the distinguished Minority Whip, Mr. Hoyer, called it a procedural hiccup. But regardless, if you were here that night, it was wild. People were screaming and yelling and crying. And I had the opportunity to watch the videotape about 300 times, because we then had a special committee look into it. And always in all of the frames, there was one rock, like the Rock of Gibraltar, standing there above the fray, saying we need to be calm. It reminded me a little bit, I don't know if you saw Kevin Bacon in Animal House, but where he says, stay calm, and the crowd runs him over, and he's nothing but a uniform at the end. That's what was going on around John. And the place could have devolved into a very serious problem. It looked messy. It was messy. But the measure of John's stewardship of the rules of the House, I would say that there was pressure on he and the rest of the parliamentarian staff to do what one side or the other wanted him to do, or for his opinion to come out one way or another. And the Republicans, you know, we wanted them to say, hey, they stole the vote. It was 215, 213, the gavel came down, you hoodwinked us. And from the Democratic side, the pressure was, these things happen, you know, stuff happens. You know, that no rules were broken, no harm, no foul. And John, as he has throughout his service, both as deputy and now as parliamentarian, didn't pick sides. He called the game right down the line. He told us what he thought based upon the rules, the precedents of the House. And I will tell you, you knew it was a good decision because neither of us liked it. I mean, the Republicans didn't like what he had to say, the Democrats didn't like what he had to say. And that, to me, is the mark of a fair ruling, because he called it as he saw it. The last thing that I want to say about his service is, you know, I got here in 1994 and 1995. And 1995 was the first time the Republicans were in the majority for 40 years in the House of Representatives. And I remember going to my first conference meeting, and all these guys, Charlie Johnson was the parliamentarian at the time, and speakers would get up and say to Mr. Gingrich, we're not going to keep the Democrats parliamentarian, are we? And I didn't know what the heck they were talking about. But, of course, Mr. Johnson, in fact, stayed. And I imagine there were some discussions about that in the Democratic caucus when things changed in 2007. And I know there were discussions about that when it changed again in 2011. But the fact of the matter is the parliamentarian's office, and John is the embodiment of that, he's not the Democratic parliamentarian. He's not the Republican parliamentarian. He's the parliamentarian for the House of Representatives. And that's what makes his service unique and unique to all of our parliamentarians. Now, in closing, I don't know what John's going to do, but Mr. Speaker, if John writes a book and I have to pay $147 to get it on Amazon.com, I'm really going to be honked off. So I hope, John, if you do write your memoirs or some tome with the Speaker of the House over in Great Britain, that you let it come out in paperback so that all of us can enjoy it. And make it, please, a good read and not so dry. But to John and to your family, listen, I really appreciate your friendship and your service. You've gotten me out of a lot of messes, not into too many, and for your friendship and for your guidance of this House over your career, I am very grateful, and I thank you, and I wish you well in whatever you decide to do. Mr. Speaker, thank you for your patience, and I would yield back our time.
The gentleman yields back.
Nicely done. Charlie deserved that too.
Yeah, it is.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, for 30 minutes.
That will be fine. Matt, can you help me stretch this out? We learned a long time ago, we can only put so many boards.
We're done with this one, right?
Mr. Speaker, This is something we try to do out of my office every few months, where we try to update a number of the budget numbers we're seeing coming from particularly the President and try to put them in some perspective. And I thought this would be one of those opportunities, because we're about to work on the budget the rest of this week, to stand here and help everyone understand some really scary things that are out there in the numbers and some things we've been talking about for the last year and the fact they're getting worse. And Mr. Speaker, you also being my friend from Arizona, you've actually heard me tell this story. A year ago, we stood here and did this presentation. And on my way back, got back to the office and the phone was ringing. Reached down, picked it up, and it was a gentleman from my district who was nice enough but kept telling me over and over that he didn't believe me, that the numbers didn't feel right. And after about a half an hour discussing with him, I probably was a little too harsh. I said, I don't know where the feelings key is on my calculator. And I think at that point he hung up on me. Look, the numbers are real. It doesn't feel warm and fuzzy, but it's real. And I'm actually going to break one of the congressional rules in communication where we're often supposed to talk about at a 30,000-foot level. I'm going to drive down into some of the weeds here, but it's important. This is the future of our country. This is our destiny unless we make some substantial changes. The first slide up here, and all these are going to be up on our website within the next week, the congressional website, is just trying to demonstrate how unrealistic many of these numbers coming from the White House are. 2008 was the peak of revenues into the federal government. We'll give you an idea. The President is saying in 5 years, revenues are going to be up 50% from where they are today, actually from that peak in 2008. And if you think of that, so we're going to have this dramatic rise in revenues over the next 5 years, and that's where their deficit projections are coming from. Well, guess what? On the slides I'm going to show you, we still use the President's numbers. But I want you to understand they're based on, I think, substantial fantasy when you start to understand the White House's use of what they're predicting as revenues and GDP growth. So as we go through these, and I'm going to throw a lot of slides here, but the next two slides are the easiest to understand and hopefully tell the greatest part of the story. This is 2011. 63% of all of our spending is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest on the debt, veterans benefits. We'll call those the mandatory spending. Many people call them the entitlements. This year, 37% of our spending is what we'll call discretionary, military, and the line of alphabet agencies that we all think of. Foreign aid, veterans, all discretionary over here, 37% of the spending. This is this year. So you see, 63, 37. What happens a year from now? Matt, I'll ask you to. So in 2017, basically 5 budget years from now, do you notice a little different? We went from 63% to 75% is now in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest on the debt, veterans benefits. 5 years from now, 75% of our budget is in mandatory entitlement spending, and the discretionary keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller in real dollars. And I'm going to show you some slides in a little bit that are going to demonstrate even military goes down in real dollars. No more of this discussion of, well, you guys are just slowing down the growth. No, it actually goes down in real dollars. This is our future. And understand, the mandatory, the entitlement side is growing so fast. In about 10 or 11 years, if you held everything even, it would consume every dollar of the budget. There's no more military. There's no more discretionary. Everything is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest on the debt, veterans benefits. This is our future. We need to tell the truth. Look, Washington, D.C. has had a bad habit of avoiding a lot of these hard decisions that are ahead of us. And it's almost like they forgot there were going to be baby boomers. We knew people were going to turn 65 for how many years? 65 years. We're now year one into the baby boomers retiring. At the end of the next 17 years, so the 18-year cycle of baby boomers, at the end of that, think of this, about 36, 37% of our population will be on Social Security. You have to understand that's about 76, 78 million of our friends and neighbors will be over 65. This should have been decades of planning for that retirement, for that baby boom, and Washington, D.C. did not do it. So now members of this House, and I'm one of the freshmen here, I've been here 15 months, now need to step up, tell the truth to the American people that this is our future. If we don't deal with it today, we are going to deal with devastating consequences a couple years from now. The next couple of slides, I'm going to try to help demonstrate what the numbers and how they break down. And I'm sorry, I know I'm throwing lots of slides, but this is, one more time, this is important. This is our future. This is the 2011. Everything you see in the blue is the mandatory spending we were just talking about. So you get some sort of sense of what it is. Here's Social Security. Here's what we'll call the welfare programs. Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the debt. We are one of the luckiest people to ever live when you think about this year. We expect to spend only about $229 billion on interest on our debt. Well, understand, our debt now is what, $15.5 trillion? About $11 trillion plus of that is what we call publicly held debt. This is important to understand. A big chunk of our debt we borrow internally. We reach into Social Security and the Medicare Part A Trust Fund and other places. But the $11+ trillion that we have to go out in open markets and sell, that's our great risk because we are beholden to what interest rate the market's willing to buy our debt for. This year, with these incredibly low interest rates, I mean, what, a 10-year bond today is, what, 2.25? We're only going to spend about $229 billion this year is our projection for that $11 trillion of publicly held debt. But what happens when we go to normal interest rates? And at the same time, just like this last year where we borrowed, what, another $1.4 trillion? Got to understand, here it becomes one of our Achilles heels. We go from in 2011, that $229 billion in interest, to in 2017, we expect interest to be $565 billion. Understand, that's basically, in 2017, what defense is. Our interest on the debt will equal what defense is. And as we walk through these numbers, please understand, it's Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest on the debt, veterans benefits that are exploding because of the demographic issues. It's math. And this is our future. And you'll notice, as we were showing in the previous chart, discretionary now is down to 25% of all spending. 75% is those mandatory, what we like to call entitlements. And this is our future. And as I was just trying to share, and this is important because I got this question at a town hall this last Saturday. Well, when you say that defense is going to be taking all sorts of cuts, you mean just cuts in the growth. No, I mean in real dollars. You know, we expect, the way the budgets are being laid out right now, the way the President's numbers are, by 2017, actual, real dollars, not adjusted for inflation, not the projection of portion of growth, real dollars, are going to be substantially less than they are today. Our projection 2012 budget, about $709 billion. In 2017, $582 billion. One of the, what is the federal government's constitutional obligations? Protection of the country, defense, and you'll notice in real dollars it's going down. So what will even be the purchasing power of that money 5 years from now? And you'll start to understand the reality of what's going on. And please understand, it's being driven why? Because the mandatory spending, the entitlements, are continuing to explode, so everything else in government will shrink and be crushed. We thought we would try to provide even a little more detail. And these are brand new slides for us, and these will all be up on our website, hopefully sometime this week, and sort of helping put percentages on the numbers. You saw the big graph of, hey, in 5 years, 75% of all of our spending is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest on the debt, veterans benefits. But we thought we would show, here's the current percentages so you can see what's going on there. This is 2011. Defense is 18.8. In 5 years, defense will be 12.4% of the budget. Department of Health and Human Services, which is substantially Medicare and Medicaid, this year is 24.7% of the spending. In 5 years, it's 26.8. But where else is the explosion? Department of Treasury, which is substantially debt, paying interest on our debt, will go from 14.9% of the total budget. In 5 years, it's going to be 20.5%. What I'm trying to demonstrate here is we're being consumed by our own interest, having to finance our own debt. We're being consumed by the basic demographics of our nation because Washington, D.C. did not tell us the truth, did not set aside the resources that were absolutely necessary to deal with the baby booming population. And we're going to have 76 million of our brothers and sisters in this baby boom cycle over this 18 years. Remember, when it's done, it's 36, 37% of the population on Social Security. I'm fearful, unless we step up and make the policy changes that are absolutely necessary, and thank heaven for Paul Ryan and many of the hardworking budget members here in the House. They're laying out the truth. They're laying out what is absolutely necessary to keep this republic operating and to tell the truth about the budget and the numbers. So one of the things we got this last weekend back home, I had a couple come up to me pointing their finger saying, well, if you would just do things like the Buffett rule, if you would do things like that, you would solve the problems. So one of the things we've loved to do in our office is how do you make big numbers understandable? Because let's face it, when I stand here and talk about $15.5 trillion in debt, or talk about this, talk about that, it often is overwhelming number-wise. So we came up with this idea of a clock. And we've done this for a number of different things. Now here's the good news and the bad news. We're borrowing a lot less money right now than we were borrowing a year ago. That's the good news. The bad news is we're still borrowing $3.5 billion every single day, and we project for the next 365 days $3.5 billion every single day. But when you hear the President, when you hear many of my friends on the left say, well, if we just had something like the Buffett rule where these rich people have to pay all this extra taxes because they're escaping, what does it actually pay? What does it actually mean? If you use the President's own model and don't pretend that there's going to be certain, tax avoidance and smart lawyers finding ways around it, and that it doesn't slow down the economy and doesn't change people's behaviors and all the other things that happen when you raise a tax, and live in math fantasy so every dime comes into the federal government, what does it actually buy us? Well, we did the math on it, and we figured out it would pay for 3 minutes and 30 seconds of that daily borrowing. So when you see members walk up to these microphones and talk about things like, well, if we just had the Buffett rule, we would be fine, they're not telling you the truth. Or it's back to that story before, they found a feelings button on their calculator and it makes them feel better, but it's not real math. The entire Buffett rule would pay for 3 minutes and 30 seconds of borrowing a day at the current rate of borrowing, which is $3.5 billion a day. Mr. Speaker, I know this is a lot of math. I know this is a lot of numbers to throw out, but it's our future. When you see what's happened in Europe, when you realize people in Greece and so many other countries lived in a fantasy, and a lot of it was perpetuated by their own governments, not telling them the truth. Well, I'm telling you the truth, and I'm using the President's own numbers to get there. It's why the decisions that are going to be made here this week as we start to set out our budget documents, it's why we desperately need the Senate to step up and tell the truth to the American people that if you want to save this republic, we got to deal with the reality of our math, because our math is the single most dangerous thing to this republic right now. Mr. Speaker, I yield back. Thank you.
Does the gentleman have a motion to adjourn?